Hi everyone, this is my discussion on Johnston's Chapter 8. The title of the chapter is Ethics, Rights, and Values Without the Heat. The chapter is broken down into four main sections: ethics and ethical communities, rights, values, and taking the heat out of the arguments. The first part, ethics and ethical communities. Johnston describes ethics as antecedent responses or behaviors and reinforcers or punishment established by a community that tell us how to behave. So in short, ethics are what we call the behaviors for a community and how the members behave towards one another. Ethical communities are groups of people that share participation in contingencies that reinforce or punish certain behavioral patterns. Examples of ethical communities are families, religions, and the communities which we live in. We're all a part of an ethical community within this class, and on our discussion boards especially, the professor has established rules and behavioral patterns that we're expected to follow in our discussions. So if someone were to be really rude or abrasive, there would be a punishment for that. And we all receive reinforcement when we post something because someone either responds or someone compliments us on the work that we've done. Ethical behaviors, according to Johnston, deal with the behaviors of a community and how that community influences each other's behaviors. The contingencies within that community are what create the values, or the rules that are saying what is acceptable behavior and what is not. The standards don't only involve behaviors with a direct impact, but also those that have an indirect effect. So Johnston states that our standards can have emotional impacts or environmental impacts. So when we see a missing child or something about animal abuse, we have an emotional impact to that, although it doesn't directly affect us. Environmental impacts such as air pollution, water pollution, those types of things have an impact on us, and we take a stand against them while they may not be directly affecting us at the same time. Rights is verbal behaviors. So Johnston explains that rights are verbal behaviors that are used as statements in our everyday life about the obtainment of reinforcement or the avoidance of punishment. Stating that we have a right to something is our way of stating that we are able to obtain a reinforcer and that others may only interfere with that goal with our express consent. Let's take people that drink a glass of wine after work every night. Well, some people may say that that's wrong to do, but others may say, I've worked really hard all day, so I deserve a glass of wine, and you have no real chance of making that not happen, because it's my right to do that. Rights are often demands of how the speaker tells us about their access to reinforcement or avoiding punishment. My main example here, because I'm raising a teenager, is my son feels that he has a right to privacy. I feel that I have a right to check his phone without his express consent. Rights may function as tax about the environment, such as a noise ordinance. I live near a concert venue, and there's a noise ordinance stating that all concerts have to end by 11 p.m. The people that live closely to the concert venue feel that they have a right to go to bed. The people at the concert could be in direct conflict and feel that they have a right to listen to music all night long. This brings us to Johnston's next point, which is just because a statement of rights is made does not necessarily mean that it's valid or more important than another's expressed rights. Any one right can most often be matched by another right's statement to the opposite opinion. See the example above about the cell phone or the example about the noise ordinance in the concert. So where do rights come from? Well, they come from our ethical communities. The ethical communities that we're a part of define our rights. Our rights statements and those of other individuals involved in the same ethical communities are truly defined by the community in its definition for our rights. So in our ethical community of the United States, our governing body has established the right to free speech. It's part of our ethical community's beliefs. Well, other communities around the globe don't necessarily agree with the right to free speech. Our histories with ethical communities lead us to the outcomes that are reinforcing or punishing. Our ethical communities give us support for our rights. So let's take my son, for example. His ethical community of his friends support his right to privacy with his cell phone, and he receives reinforcement from them when he says, oh my gosh, my mom just checked my phone, and they say it's so ridiculous that parents do that. His ethical community of his family supports that his phone can be checked at any time, and that by following the established conditions that we've set up for the use of that phone, he's going to avoid punishment and receive reinforcement by me saying thanks for following the rules. His history with both communities allows him to know his rights and how to gain reinforcement and how to avoid punishment. Johnston goes on to discuss values. Values are how we describe behaviors in certain circumstances and preferred social reinforcement contingencies. Values are not physical entities. So if we describe behaviors in environmental circumstances and we describe behaviors in desired social reinforcement contingencies, then we take out the physical and emotional beings of values. There is an overlap of rights and values according to Johnston. Both refer to morally acceptable behaviors. Both refer to long-standing preferred ways of behaving. Both are verbal behaviors associated with reinforcing circumstances, and both originate with ethical communities. So I don't know if y'all watch it or not, but we watch The Walking Dead at my house. So the varying ethical communities within The Walking Dead and the characters of The Walking Dead have created their own set of values and rights. Each feel that they have a right to live or a right to life. Some have maintained the long-standing values from the pre-zombie world, such as you shouldn't kill someone just to kill, or that stealing is wrong. Other ethical communities on The Walking Dead no longer stand to those long-standing beliefs that were there before the pre-zombie world and see that random killings of humans are totally fine and that they're not a violation of their ethical community values. Are values beyond science? Well, according to Johnston, not if we approach values as a verbal behavior rather than a concrete truth. Just because we believe something is true does not mean it is, no matter how widely that belief may be shared, according to Johnston. So if you take the idea of, let's say, female circumcision, just because that belief is part of a value system in one society does not necessarily mean that it's going to be a part of a value system in another society. Johnston also states that if we change the way we ask the questions about values from how individuals within a community are expected to behave based on the values of that community into questions about how specific behaviors are impacted under a specific set of circumstances, then we can have a more scientific approach to things. Johnston also says a change in how we discuss rights and values from an emotion to an investigation of the behavior can take out some of those emotional charges that are experienced in discussions that involve hot topics. So what is Johnston's approach to taking the heat out of the arguments? Well, within the chapter, he breaks it down that by approaching a values or rights conversation in behavioral terms, it can take the emotional responses out of the conversation. First, Johnston states that participants need to agree that values are learned verbal behaviors. Without this, you're not going to get very far. Next, Johnston states that you need to center the conversation around how the verbal behavior was learned. Then, you need to figure out your own agenda in such a discussion. What are you trying to get out of this? Then, no matter how you feel about the topic of the discussion, you need to check it and make sure that you're following methodological soundness, or the guidelines. There has to be some methodology in there, or it's just going to turn into an emotional array of arguments. And last, you need to let the discussion not be about who is right or wrong, but about the evidence that might be useful in resolving the issue, according to Johnston. I'm not sure that this approach will always work, but it's a nice way to look at things in terms of how to take really emotionally charged issue or values or rights approached issues such as abortion or flag burning or those types of things and approach it from a behavioral aspect to maybe take the emotional side out of it. So for my discussion question, I would like everyone to think of 2 ethical communities that you're a part of. Are there any conflicts within these communities? And can you think of one topic that you could bring the groups together to discuss in Johnston's suggested format? My 2 communities are my church community and my BCBA community. In the chapter, Johnston goes into great lengths and detail talking about how religious behaviors or religious beliefs are actually just behaviors. I know that some of my church community would argue that. After reading the chapter, I realized that, regardless of what personal beliefs are, The behaviors that were centered around my religion growing up made it really reinforcing, and that ethical community reinforced it for me and built in the values. So I received reinforcement for achieving certain things. I received reinforcement for going to church every Sunday because there was somebody that gave candy and somebody that gave gum. My BCBA community would reinforce me by saying, okay, well, look at that from a behavioral standpoint as rather than an emotional standpoint or a rights or a values standpoint. So I'd like for y'all to give me examples of your two communities and whether or not you think there would be a way for them to discuss things. Thanks so much.